Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school. So today we're going to be looking into the dark and mysterious life story of the first fashion influencer. It's Coco Chanel. Gabrielle Chanel was born in 1883 in Soma, France. Her mother was a washerwoman who brought up 5 children alone while living in a poorhouse, and her father sold haberdashery around the French market towns and was known to be a rogue and a womanizer and a drinker. And Chanel felt very embarrassed about her past. She would often lie about her childhood memories, and this was because she felt a lot of shame about her past and she wanted to remain a mystery to her elite clientele. Her mother died when she was just 11 years old, and so her father took her and her sisters Julia and Antoinette to live in Aubezine Abbey, and this was a dormitory ran by strict Catholic nuns. And while they were there, the girls were taught to sew because the abbey was actually famous for its embroidery, and so they would have a skill instead of having to financially rely on getting a husband. And so Gabrielle was actually grateful for this time because she said it brought her strength and a rebellious spirit that would be useful in the fashion industry. And you can see many of her house codes are inspired by this religion. There is the black and white of the nuns' habits, and also the double C logo can be found in the stained glass windows. She went on to live an uneventful life in the provinces where she worked as a seamstress, and she just looked set to marry like a local farmer or a shopkeeper, but she actually managed to escape this dreary life when she moved to Garrison Town, and this was a place that was populated by the army. And so Chanel became the darling of the army officers when she began to sing in the cabaret clubs in Moulins, and a lot of her lyrics had the words Coco in them, and so she became known as Coco Chanel. During this time, she met her first lover, Etienne Balsan, and he whisked her away to his chateau in Paris, where she would be one of his mistresses. And the headmistress of the home actually taught her how to use her charm to make money because they were working girls and they were just there really to raise the status of their men. And so she lived there and she had a luxury lifestyle. During this time also, though, it is rumoured that Chanel got pregnant, and nobody knows whether she actually did have the baby or not. But she did take care of a child, and this was Andre Palassi, who she said was her nephew. She claimed that she had taken care of him because her sister had passed away. Although Coco did enjoy the lifestyle and riding the horses of her polo player lover, she actually felt very bored and depressed most of the time, and that was until she met and fell in love with a visiting Englishman named Arthur Boy Capel. Her tastes in fashion became influenced by the British man, including his hunting jackets, breeches and riding boots. And Chanel was really romanticised by the idea of countryside hedonism. And so she started to dress like the men in jodhpurs and vests. And this was really unusual because kept women usually dressed very decoratively and flamboyantly. And so Arthur Capel, he noticed that Gabrielle had this flair for fashion, and so he lent her money to start her own business. And so she started making hats for the high society women of the Etienne Society. In 1914, Boy Capel took Chanel away to Deauville as the onslaught of the First World War commenced. And while she was there, she actually noticed a business opportunity because she saw many elegant women arriving in the town and they actually needed some new dresses and attire. So she wanted to make a collection that had comfort and elegance, but also a neatness to it. And so she started experimenting with unusual fabrics like jersey and cotton because these had actually been reserved for men's underwear. So it was quite a radical step in fashion, and it was described as luxurious poverty. And the war had actually meant that the figure of women had changed to being really slim. And this style of clothing with no corsets or boning actually hung very nicely against their thin figures. And this became the trend and the elegant way to look. And so Chanel started to design for a new type of women because women had been seen as kind of decorative and just idle, but now they actually were ambitious and busy. So she needed to design a whole new wardrobe for the modern woman. And although Boy Capel had funded this venture, actually Chanel was an independent woman and she never stopped working. In 1918, she bought the first of her 5 properties in Rue Carbon in Paris. And number 31, she actually owned the downstairs boutique and the first floor haute couturière. The second floor was her apartment and she decorated it with supernatural paraphernalia and books. Sadly for Chanel, Boy Capel was actually killed in a car accident, and this set on a period of mourning for Chanel, who ordered that absolutely everything be painted black. And she also took on the mourning clothing of wearing all black. And then she actually turned this into a trend for elegant women. And it coincided very nicely with the Jazz Age and the Flapper Girls, the Roaring Twenties. And her little black tasseled dresses became very, very fashionable because they were really easy to wear and flattering. And so the little black dress became iconic and is still a very powerful tool used in fashion to this day. Chanel started to court married couples where she would dress the wife and then seduce the husband. And she never married, but she did provide financial support to many avant-garde creatives such as artist Picasso and writer Pierre Reverdy, playwright John Cocteau, and composer Igor Stravinsky. And these creatives would enrich Chanel's life culturally, and then this actually began to show within her work. Wanting to expand on her success, she actually combined her talents with perfumer Ernest Beau to create a fragrance for the modern woman. The number 5 had been recurring in her creative process, as well as her being the 5th sign of the zodiac. So when she was given the samples, of course, she chose number 5, which became the iconic Chanel number 5. Chanel was way ahead of her time in influencer marketing because she knew that if she gave this scent to her elite social friends, that they would then spray it everywhere they went, including high society functions. And this just created a hype around the perfume and everybody wanted to buy it. And it was even mentioned by pop culture icons like Andy Warhol, Marilyn Monroe, and even the Queen of England. In 1923, she was pursued romantically by the Duke of Westminster. And although Chanel was a very wealthy woman, the Duke of Westminster was the richest man in Europe. And so she had an even richer lifestyle. They spent all their times on yachts in Monte Carlo and hosting lavish dinner parties at Eaton Hall. And so this was an uprising for Chanel in society. She would go with him on his outdoor pursuits like hunting and fishing, and she actually became an expert fisherwoman and was spotted by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and he really enjoyed Chanel's company. And because she was moving in these circles, she started to adopt the dress code of the British royal family, which is very much about hunting wear and tweed. And so she enlisted the help of a fabric makers called Lintons, and they went on to have a long-term collaboration. And what she did was she went into the forest and she collected flowers and moss and leaves, and she took this to Lintons and asked them to make her tweed in these colours that looked like the autumn forest. Being a man of importance, the Duke really wanted the full attention of Coco Chanel, but she was a workaholic and she had to create biannual collections, so he moved her atelier all the way to London so she could keep working. And so she started to show in London, and here she would recruit high society women to work as models. And so the tables had actually turned from the rich people who Chanel was working for, actually now working for Chanel. Unfortunately, an aging Chanel, she wasn't able to give the Duke of Westminster an heir, so he married another lady called Leola Ponsonby, and she became his wife, and Chanel became her dressmaker. By 1930, Chanel had moved back to Paris and she was staying in a luxury suite at the Ritz Hotel. And this is where she enters into a very dark time for Chanel's life when she is recruited as the poster girl for radical right-wing Europeans. And she actually lost her lover, who was right-wing journalist Paul Eribe, when he just dropped in front of her suddenly, and this left her actually addicted to sleep medication. During the war and the occupation of Paris, Chanel still lived in the Ritz Hotel amongst the German officers, and here she kind of befriended them in order to negotiate the release of her son André Palassi from a prisoner of war camp. And the officers were very, very interested in her allegiance with the British Prime Minister. And so they made a plan that she would meet with Winston Churchill as a messenger between the English and the Germans. But it was a bit of a far-fetched idea and didn't actually come to fruition. And she never actually talked to Winston Churchill again. After the liberation of Paris, she actually tried to change allegiance because she was at risk of being arrested as a collaborationist of the Germans, and the punishment for this was very severe. So she actually fled to Switzerland and lived there for the next decade. Backed by her Jewish collaborator Pierre Vertimus, she actually reappeared on the Paris fashion scene in 1954, and she had been prompted to return out of anger because she had seen the popularity of Christian Dior's new look. This had brought back corsets and long skirts, and these were the things that Chanel wanted rid of. So she came back to do this, but actually her return was not welcomed by Paris at first because they still had bitter feelings about her involvement in the war. However, her two-piece tweed designs were noticed by Texan luxury fashion retailer Neiman Marcus, and Marcus actually loved these designs. He found them very youthful and elegant, and so she started to sell her licensed copies all throughout America, and the designs were really popular. She made knitted outfits for the most famous female celebrities like Jackie Kennedy and Elizabeth Taylor. And so Chanel became the brand for the rich lifestyles of jet-set women. Chanel continued working from her Paris salon, and here she would recruit the most beautiful, tall and glamorous models to walk in her exclusive French fashion shows. And here she attracted the attention of the First Lady of France and the French movie stars, who all loved Chanel's clothing. And she worked right up until sadly having a heart attack and passing away on the 10th of January 1971 at 87 years old. Gabrielle Chanel is the undisputed star of modern fashion, and her house codes that she created are still featured on the runways every single season. She was the very first fashion influencer, and when people make money, they still go directly to Chanel to get a part of that legacy. And her story was very brutal. It had loss and love and success and then tragedy, and it's very relatable, making her the timeless Coco Chanel. Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school.